This series contains adult language and descriptions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised. Good morning, Death by Southwest listeners. It is Wednesday morning, so I am a day late, but that's okay. Yesterday ended up being a really, really busy day. I sound really loud here. Yesterday was a really busy day. We had 3 recordings with Jim, and I had a dog walk, and yeah, I don't know why I feel the need to make excuses. Basically, I was going to record last night. I was super tired after walking the pups for their night walk, and I got in bed at 8:15. And so I decided I was going to just record it this morning. I've never really, I don't really record early in the morning. I mean, I guess it's 8, so it's not that early, but I kind of like it. I'm drinking coffee out of a tin coffee cup. There's something really different about drinking coffee out of a tin coffee cup. I feel like, I don't know. I got this from Goodwill a long time ago, and it's tin, and on the outside it has like kind of a vintage looking map of the world. Makes me feel like I'm drinking coffee in the 1970s, and I like it. So that's where I'm at this morning. I should take a picture. Cat is lounging like crazy. So if you hear purring or, let's see, how do I take this picture?
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
If you hear purring or meowing, that is Cat. And not the cat if you saw my Instagram story this morning, or the Death by Southwest Instagram story, which is basically mine. I've essentially turned Death by Southwest into my personal and podcast Instagram. I was driving the dogs to the dirt roads for our walk and came across I've seen him or her before. It's a little kitten. I saw them in a tree. I saw it in a tree with another kitten a couple of months ago, maybe. And have seen them a few times and have stopped myself from getting them because they've either been in the tree or like on top of a car right there in the parking lot. And also I can't have any more cats. So, but this morning he was like close to the street, which makes me very nervous. It's not a main road, it's a back road, but still, I don't know. I did not stop because we were heading to our walk and I can't have more cats. And sometimes I think, well, is he enjoying living here? Like, he hasn't moved from this literal area. It looks like there's a couple, like casitas. They're not apartments, but casitas on one side of the street, and on the other side there's houses, a couple houses, but it's not a main road. And I don't know, there's trees. Maybe he's liking living there. Maybe he has siblings or his mom's there. I don't know. I don't want to like swipe a cat or a kitten that doesn't need to be saved. And then I also think, well, that's just stupid. Outside cats usually end up dead, and sorry if that offends anyone, but that's what I think. And I should just take him. And then I was like, maybe I could take him this morning. I thought maybe I could take him and give him to my friend whose cat just passed. But that's a little presumptuous as well. So, the ending to that uneventful story that I just told is that I did not take the kitten, whatever. But I do have to drive down that street for my dog walk, which I'm going to do after this. And then, we'll see. So I'll keep you posted. I know everyone is on the edge of their seats with excitement as to whether I will find and take this kitten or not. So don't worry. I will keep you posted. What else? I don't think I have much else. I am very excited about Halloween next week. I don't know why, because I've never gotten trick-or-treaters here, but I'm still going to buy candy and hope that I do. Maybe I'll put like a little flashing sign at the end of the driveway, like, we have candy, come here. That also seems kind of creepy maybe. So maybe that's not a great idea. But I am excited about Halloween. And this weekend I have decided we are going to Slaughterhouse, the haunted house here in Tucson. I know I already talked about Terror in the Corn, so I will not talk about that again, even though I loved it. So we'll see if Slaughterhouse stands up and if it's as good as Terror in the Corn. And I will let you know. What else? I picked up my new phone yesterday. My old phone was super cracked, and I'd had it for like almost 4 years. So it was way overdue for an upgrade. It's nice. iPhone 16. It does have some like pretty cool improvements. If you're an iPhone person, you probably know that. I mean, at least I think the iPhone that I had before I just got this yesterday was a 12. And I've had iPhones for years, so I always feel like, new iPhone, it's never that different. It's like, the camera's going to be amazing this year. And it's like amazing for a minute, and then it's like, it's not really that great. And the changes, like I never notice any big changes to the iPhone. And there's not any like physical changes really. I mean, the buttons are a little different, but whatever. But there are, like, you can make your text in text messages. You can make it bold or italic. Like you can change the font, and not change the font, but you can format your text a little bit more than you could before, because before you couldn't do it at all. And you can schedule a text message to send it later. I thought that was pretty cool. I tried that last night. It worked very well. But sometimes I'm like, I want to say this to somebody, but it's too early where they live, or I know they're, in a meeting or something. I don't know. I thought it was kind of cool. What else? My favorite thing. I'm going to have to post a picture of this, which I feel like I say a lot and then I literally never do. But I'll keep trying. That you can, what is the fucking word I'm looking for? Personalize your apps. So like even in the last the iPhone I had before, you could move your apps, bundle them in a little package. I don't even know what to call it, or move them around. Sure. But now you can change the color. You can like tint all your apps, whatever color you want, so they all match. And for my OCD aesthetic brain, like I'm only OCD in certain ways. And I know that's, oh God, I'm not even going to do it. I'm not actually OCD. So I'm not trying to offend anyone who is by using that term, which I'm rolling my eyes at myself right now that I'm even explaining this, but I don't like to offend people. So anyways, I'm not OCD about a lot of things. Like my car, it's a disaster. It's gross. I have empty soda water bottles and cans in there, and dog hair, like 3 inches of dog hair everywhere. I mean, it's disgusting, and I don't care. I just never clean it. It doesn't bother me. I don't know why. But if like the certain things in the house, like I like everything to be in a certain place, and I care very much about the lighting and just the aesthetics of things, but not in my car, and generally not in my closet. I'm not very good at keeping my closet clean. Anyways, this took a turn. It really like pleases me to see all the apps be the same color. I love it. There's some other things, but it's pretty cool. I like it. I know nobody asked for that phone review, but there it is. What else? I didn't write anything down that I wanted to talk about, so now I don't remember, but that's fine. Oh, there's Kat. That's fine, because this has been a 10-minute intro about nothing. So let's get into this story, because I actually I'm mad at myself that I didn't tell this yesterday, because I am really excited about it. It takes place in Texas, so it's in the Southwest, and it takes place on Halloween. So I really love this. And let's just go. Let's get into it. So this is the story. I'm sorry, you can't see my brain working, but it was working just then. I was trying to decide, do I want to say like this is about the murder of so-and-so right at the top, or do I want to wait and just tell the story and you'll find out, a little suspense. We're going to wait. So this takes place in Deer Park, Texas in 1974. Deer Park, just to give you a brief south of place, it was a small but growing community in 1974 located southeast of Houston in Harris County. Houston, for those who don't know Texas, is also located pretty southeast. It's very close to the Gulf of Mexico, so it's close to the coast. It's very close to its neighboring state of Louisiana. So it's at the very south of the state of Texas and slightly towards the east. I don't know why I need to over-explain everything. It's quite an irritating quality. So that's where Houston is, and then Deer Park is just slightly southeast of Houston. In the 1970s, the population in Deer Park was 13 to 15,000 people. Any growth that occurred happened because of job opportunities in nearby refineries and chemical plants along the Houston Ship Channel. Community life back in 1974, Deer Park had a small town atmosphere, strong community ties. There was lots of local school events, church events, general community events that many residents participated in. And Deer Park today is around 33,000 residents. So it's about doubled since 1974, which actually I feel like that isn't a huge amount of growth. The Deer Park is about 10 square miles. So I guess that is a lot of people. That's pretty small. Let's see. Still, the petrochemical industry is a cornerstone of the local economy. There's major employers are Shell, Dow Chemical, things like that. And they apparently are known for very strong academic programs. And that's it. Everything. I mean, I have some other, annual events. They have a Reindeer Park Christmas Festival. That is apparently pretty cool. Yeah. So it's kind of small. I mean, 33,000. Oh my gosh, I just saw something else that I had written down. The city receives about 50 inches of rain annually. Oh my gosh. I wonder what Tucson receives annually. Like 6 inches maybe? That's a lot. But basically it is a small community located southeast of Houston. That's what you need to know. I know what I wanted to do at the beginning of this episode. Damn. Okay, well, we're going to do it anyways. This might just be a longer episode. So I realized that I've been talking about how much I love Halloween, and I couldn't have told you the history of Halloween. I know that I've read about it, learned about it, looked it up. Like I didn't, it's in my back brain somewhere, but there's no way if you had said like, tell me Halloween's history, that I could just sit down and tell you about it. So I looked it up again, and because I figured like, this is a good thing to learn to talk about. Man, I'd love if somebody would like write me a script for this so I didn't stumble over my words constantly. So, for those who don't know, I didn't go all the way back. Like when I looked up the history of Halloween, it went like way, 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 way back. But I went about as far as like the Roman influence and the 9th century, where the church established November 1st as All Saints' Day, also known as All Hallows' Day. And it was a day to honor saints and martyrs, possibly to replace a pagan festival that used to occur then. And then All Souls' Day was on November 2nd, and that was to honor all the faithfully departed. So the night before All Saints' Day became known as... I have to... Whoa, turn my phone upside down. I just got a spam text message that caught my eye. So the evening before All Saints' Day is All Hallows' Eve, but eventually it was shortened to Halloween. Medieval traditions were called souling and guising. So in England during the Middle Ages, souling, like S-O-U-L, souling involved the poor visiting wealthy family homes to receive pastries called soul cakes in exchange for a promise to pray for the souls of the homeowner's deceased relatives. And then guising, G-U-I-S-I-N-G, originated in Scotland and Ireland and involved people dressing in costumes and masks, often as spirits or ghosts, and they would go door to door performing tricks, songs, or reciting different things in exchange for food or coins. So both of those things from medieval traditions obviously have trickled down to what we know Halloween to be today. Because I was interested, like, how did Halloween become about candy and dressing up in costumes? And so I think that, to me, that the souling and the guising from England, Scotland, and Ireland, that heavily relates to it. And so before I tell you about Halloween coming to America, I wanted to know a little bit about Halloween before candy and trick-or-treating. So Halloween has agricultural roots. Apparently it was deeply connected to agricultural cycles, marking the end of the harvest and preparation for winter. All Hallows Eve was a time to honor the dead and seek protection from malevolent spirits. And this is through the years. This is not any particular time. This was just kind of a general overview of what Halloween looked like prior to trick-or-treating and candy. Celebrations were communal feasts, storytelling, music, and games. There were sometimes people engaged in fortune telling to project future events. Common methods of this fortune telling, which I definitely want to know more about, included apple peels, mirrors, and fire rituals. And wearing masks and costumes were either a way to honor or ward off spirits. So it allowed these costumes allowed people to move freely without being recognized by ghosts. And jack-o'-lanterns supposedly originated from an Irish myth about Stingy Jack. People carved turnips and potatoes with grotesque faces to frighten away evil spirits. And when immigrants arrived in America, they found that pumpkins were actually better for carving than turnips and potatoes. Cool. So colonial celebrations in the American colonies, Halloween was not widely celebrated due to strict Protestant beliefs, but the southern colonies and Maryland did have harvest festivals that included elements of Halloween. And then the mass immigration of Irish and Scottish people in the mid-19th century brought many Halloween customs to the United States. And by the late 1800s, Halloween had become a more community-centered event with parties focused on games, foods of the season, and festive costumes. And the evolution of trick-or-treating, I think I said earlier, partially likely comes from in England during the Middle Ages, souling. Oh, my S's in the microphone are going crazy today. Where poor people visited wealthy people's homes to receive soul cakes, like pastries. So that likely played a role in the evolution of trick-or-treating. Also, I have something here that in the 1920s and 30s, to curb destructive behavior, communities encouraged trick-or-treating, where children dressed in costumes and would go house to house asking for small gifts or treats, coining the phrase trick-or-treat as a gentle threat for mischief if no treat was given. I guess I knew that. World War II interrupted these traditions because of sugar rationing, so it led to a decline in trick-or-treating for a period. And then post-war, the tradition surged in popularity and became a standard Halloween activity by the 1950s. So before it was candy, it was homemade cookies, cakes, fruits, nuts, coins, or small toys. And then in the 1950s and 60s, candy manufacturers began marketing small, individually wrapped candies specifically for Halloween. And then in the 1970s, this started becoming a concern, these candies that you were getting from strangers. And that's where we're going to get into our story today. So if you think about it, trick-or-treating is kind of a relatively recent kind of phenomenon that was, like I just said, really firmly established by the 1950s. Also, something that came about in the 1950s was concerns about trick-or-treating and about the treats that people were handing out. People started developing a fear and a panic about that the people giving out candy might put razor blades or pins or poison in the candies. And so this was something that kind of concerned people, but the majority of people kind of shrugged it off like, this is ridiculous. Nobody's doing that. Until our story. So our story begins on Halloween night, a night where it's very common to see children dressed as ghosts and goblins roaming the streets in search of treats. But in 1974, on Halloween night, amidst the costumes and the candy and all the fun that all the kids were having in Deer Park, an actual monster blended into the crowd in the most unsuspecting disguise. A father. Ronald O'Brien was 30 years old on October 31st, 1974. He didn't turn 30 years old just then. He had turned 30 years old about 2 weeks prior. And so Ronald, his wife, Daneen, and their 2 children, 8-year-old Timothy and 5-year-old Elizabeth, kicked off the Halloween evening by sharing a meal with family friends. Jim Bates, his wife, and their children. After dinner, Ronald, who was dressed in a white optician's lab because he was an optician. He was wearing his lab. It seems weird to be wearing your optician lab at dinner, but maybe it was for the Halloween spirit. Ronald was also a deacon at his church, just by the way. So Ronald and his friend Jim decided to take their kids, Jim's son and Ronald's 2 children, Timothy and Elizabeth, out in the rainy, damp, spooky night for some trick-or-treating fun. So on their trick-or-treating adventure, they came upon a house that was completely dark, no lights on, but the kids still wanted to ring the doorbell, which they did, and they got no answer, so they moved on to the next house. Ronald didn't move on, though. He stayed at that dark house, lingering a little bit, and then he soon ran to catch up with the group, and he was excitedly waving around a handful of oversized pixie sticks. They were about 21, 22 inches long, so those like really big pixie sticks. He told the kids that they were in luck, that because that dark house had opened up, they must have been really wealthy because they were handing out very expensive treats like these oversized pixie sticks. So he gave each of the children a pixie stick, and then later that night he gave a 4th pixie stick to his friend's other daughter, 5-year-old daughter. I guess she didn't come trick-or-treating. And then the last pixie stick was given to a trick-or-treater who knocked on Jim's door. So once they wrapped up all their trick-or-treating, they were back at their house in Deer Park, Texas, and Ronald allowed his kids to pick one treat out before bedtime. Timothy chose the giant pixie stick. And Timothy's trying to open it, and then once he gets it open, he's having a hard time getting the powder out. I feel like this doesn't need to be explained, but pixie sticks filled with, it's just like a paper tube filled with sugar, flavored sugar. So Timothy was having trouble getting the sugar out. It was kind of like stuck together in there. So Ronald came up, he rubbed the straw kind of between his fingers to help break up the sugar inside, handed it back to his son, and Timothy poured the candy in his mouth, but stopped pretty quickly. And he was like, ugh, this tastes bitter. So Ronald, his dad, said, okay, well, here's some Kool-Aid, wash it down. Maybe maybe it went bad or something. But within a few minutes, Ronald heard Timothy crying out, "Dad, Dad, Dad." And he was almost immediately vomiting. And then within several minutes of the vomiting, he was having convulsions. So Ronald immediately called an ambulance. And ambulance came, took Timothy to the hospital, but it was too late. Timothy was pronounced dead upon arrival. So a detective, Bill Lanier, who was assigned to this case, got immediately to work interviewing family members. And he described Ronald. He said he was a really big guy, but he talked soft, almost feminine. He had a real hangdog look. The detective said he wasn't crying or bawling or anything, but he did seem, he was obviously affected by it. The other detective, Detective Hinton, on this case, he very quickly contacted the chief medical examiner in Harris County, and he says that Detective Hinton told the medical examiner the circumstances, about what happened. He ate some candy, he threw up, he was convulsing, and then he was dead. There's no time to do anything. I'm trying to figure out what happened. Do you have any idea what this could be? This is before the medical examiner has gotten a chance to perform an autopsy. So the medical examiner said, did you smell the boy's breath, or could you smell the boy's breath? And so Timothy wasn't right there with the detective, but spoke to the morgue, and the morgue confirmed that there was an odor of almonds coming from Timothy's mouth. And the medical examiner immediately said that's cyanide.
Birthdays, anniversaries, weddings, whatever the occasion, it just got a little more personal with meaningful photo gifts from Shutterfly. Add a silly photo to a gold-rimmed mug for your bestie. Put your sweet puppy on a cozy fleece blanket for your teen. Gift your husband a desktop plaque featuring all the kids. Enjoy 40% off orders over $29 with code POD40 at Shutterfly.com and make something that means something.
So an autopsy was performed, and that validated the medical examiner's suspicion. Timothy had ingested cyanide, in fact, enough cyanide to kill 2 to 3 grown men. So the detectives determined, after speaking to the family, that it likely came from the pixie sticks, since that's the only candy that Timothy really ate that night. And now they were concerned about other pixie sticks that might be out with other children eating them. So they very quickly kind of spread out and went about finding the other pixie sticks. So one was apparently clutched in the hand of one of the other kids. He had fallen asleep before he had been able to open the straw, because the straw had been sealed with a staple, and he wasn't strong enough to get that staple out, I guess. And so the detective had said that's what saved another boy's life. They found him in bed with the pixie stick in his hand, but he wasn't strong enough to undo the staples. The other pixie sticks were recovered from the Bates children and Timothy's sister. None of them had ingested the candy yet. So that boy who was found with it asleep must have been the trick-or-treater, I assume. So the pixie sticks went to the laboratory, and the lab tests revealed that the top 2 inches of each pixie stick had been filled with a fatal amount of cyanide. It also showed that the pixie sticks had clearly been tampered with. Someone had opened them, replaced some of the candy with poison, and then resealed them using a staple, which I don't know. I mean, that seems crazy. That's very obvious. A staple in a pixie stick. But, you know, I don't know. Maybe 1974, candy was different. And I guess, well, let me stop myself before I give too much away. So in the days after Timothy's death, the police were very aware of this incredible fear that had now taken over Deer Park and even surrounding areas, because the police put out a word that if you have any suspicious candy or if anything looks strange to you, please bring it into the police station. And they ended up with like a whole room full of just piles and bags of candy because, I mean, no kidding. If someone died from candy being poisoned in my neighborhood, I would take every piece of candy that any of my children had gotten and take it immediately to the police station. That's basically what everyone did. So over the next few days, police are, they had interviewed Ronald, his wife, Jim Bates, his wife, and Ronald had claimed that he, it must have been from trick-or-treating, one of the houses they went to. And so the police were like, well, we need you to figure out what house gave you the pixie sticks. And Ronald was trying to recollect it, trying, but it was like very vague. He kept saying at first, like, I don't know which home. And then it was like, I don't know which street. But he told them that he only took his kids on 2 streets. I mean, this isn't like a huge city. It's a small town. So they trick-or-treated on 2 streets. And he couldn't remember which street it was. And then he couldn't remember which house it was. And then he said, I didn't see a person. I could only see an arm. Police were like, what? This wasn't like months ago. This was like yesterday. And your son died. Think harder, So they took Ronald and they like walked up and down the neighborhood several times, hoping that would trigger his memory. And eventually it did. He claimed that it was that dark house where no one initially answered the door. He said, my kids rang the bell, nobody answered. So they moved on, but I kind of stayed behind and somebody then suddenly answered the door, but I didn't see anybody. It was just a hairy arm that stuck out a handful of pixie sticks. Kind of sounds weird, which police thought it did too, but they're like, okay, well, let's go to that house. So the house was owned by a man named Courtney Melvin. So police went to the house. They were prepared to arrest him, but he wasn't home. So they found out where he worked. He was an air traffic controller and a supervisor at Hobby Airport. So they headed over there planning to arrest him in front of all of his colleagues. But it turned out that Courtney Melvin had a rock solid alibi. He was at work during the time that Ronald claimed he handed him this candy. And there were about 200 other people at the airport, colleagues at the airport, that could confirm that, in addition to timesheets. It had been his wife and daughter that had been at home and had turned out the lights because they'd already run out of candy. So Ronald's story didn't really hold up, which means that police are now looking at Ronald as the main suspect. He's seemed suspicious this entire time, but now they're fairly certain that it's him. But they couldn't figure out why. They were looking for a motive, so they start looking into Ronald a little bit more. And they discover that Ronald, who, like I said, was an optician for Texas State Optical, Ronald was about $100,000 in debt. He had either recently lost his home or sold it. I found different varying accounts. He was very close to having his car repossessed, and he still owed money to numerous creditors. Apparently, his employer was also about to terminate him because he had been caught stealing. And over the previous 10 years, he had also had 21 different jobs. Now, that doesn't make him guilty of anything except for probably being a bad employee, but they're just kind of stacking up all this information, and it's just seeming, curiouser and curiouser. And then the big information that really did Ronald in came out. Investigators found out that he had taken out life insurance policies totaling around $60,000 perhaps on his children shortly before Halloween. About a month before Halloween, he took out a $20,000 life insurance policy on each of the kids. And then about 8 months prior to that, he had taken out $10,000 on each of them. So each kid had about a $30,000 life insurance policy. And I mean, that's weird. Yes. But okay. I don't know. Maybe it could be explained. I'm not sure how, but fine. It certainly doesn't, open shut, seal up the case that he did this. But what did really kind of seal the deal for police, in addition to the fact that Ronald, he said the person he said gave him the candy, untrue. That was a lie. But Ronald said, "Oh, I was mistaken. Maybe I was wrong. I don't know. I can't remember now." So, okay, that could be, but we're just stacking up all the things against Ronald. He claimed the candy came from someone that it definitely did not come from. He was $100,000 in debt, about to lose his job, recently lost his home, was about to have his car repossessed, still owed a ton of money, and had just taken out pretty big life insurance policies on his very young children, 5 and 8. So that's weird. And Halloween was on Thursday. So Timothy died that Thursday evening. And on Friday morning at 9 a.m., Ronald called the insurance company to ask about the policies. So if the fact that he even took out these policies on his kids, a month prior to this happening wasn't weird enough, the fact that the morning after his 8-year-old son dies, he calls to ask about cashing in on it, that really did it for police. In addition to all of this, they were, questioning people who knew Ronald, colleagues, other family members, friends, and they discovered that several months before, he had contacted a friend who worked at a chemical company and was asking that friend a lot of very specific questions about cyanide, including how much was needed to be fatal for a human. Also, just before Halloween, like the week or two before Halloween, he had visited a chemical supply store in Houston to ask about buying cyanide, but he left because the smallest quantity they had was a 5-pound bag of cyanide. So he didn't end up buying it there. But those two things were also very weird. So now investigators are able to secure a search warrant, and they searched Ronald's home, and they found a pair of scissors with plastic residue on them. The residue was similar to what was found on the cyanide-tainted pixie sticks. So none of this is concrete, for sure evidence, but it is, come on. So all of these discoveries combined led to Ronald's arrest and subsequent questioning. So even after he was confronted with all of this growing evidence against him when he was questioned, He never confessed. One of the detectives said, quote, "He came close. I got him right to the line. An interrogation typically goes through stages. First there's denial, then you can see the subject give up. With O'Brien, I seen that give up. We'd been in the interview room for a while, and he slumped and started nodding his head like he's agreeing with me. I said, 'Now's the time to tell me,' and he nodded some more, so I waited a couple minutes. When he didn't say anything, I said, 'Ronald, tell me.' And he said, 'Tell you what?' And that moment was gone. He never got there." So it does sound like he was close to confessing, but he didn't. And you know, this is years before DNA testing. So police, there's no way to put these pixie sticks in Ronald's hand or prove that he'd bought any cyanide. So likely because of this, he's maintaining his innocence. Nonetheless, a Harris County grand jury charged him with capital murder. Ronald was going to trial, and he was going to enter a plea of not guilty. Ronald's trial began in May 1975, and Mike Hinton was the young DA at the time, assigned to prosecute Ronald. And to this day, he's given many interviews over the years and several within recent years. He remembers every detail of all of it, like it happened yesterday. And one detail that I thought was really interesting is that during the trial, at some point during the trial, Ronald turned to the prosecutor, Mike, and offered him a Tootsie Roll, which is so fucking weird. Like, first of all, why is he talking to the person who's prosecuting him? But also, really, dude, you're on trial for poisoning candy and killing your kid, and you're going to offer... I mean, maybe that was the point, actually, now that I'm saying it out loud. Maybe that was his point, that he hates the prosecutor, and so he's like, it's almost like a silent threat, like, here, take this candy. So weird, though. But Mike Hinton was certainly not the only person who was severely impacted by this entire trial and ordeal. Tom Campbell was a young reporter for a Houston television station, and he was assigned to cover this trial. And he says to this day he cannot escape the terrible memories from this case. To this day, he chooses not to participate in Halloween. He keeps his porch light off. He does not answer the door. He doesn't do trick-or-treating. He does not celebrate Halloween at all since this case that he covered. The trial was highly publicized and went into the great length that Ronald went to in planning the murder, including giving poison candy to other children to cover his tracks. Ronald's lawyer was Marvin Teague, and his opening statement, which I thought was interesting, he said, "As you know, my client was convicted of killing Halloween." And he went on, his defense was that he blamed the tainted candy on some kind of untraceable boogeyman, some sick, deranged individual who is using Halloween to poison unsuspecting children. But he had no other suspect to point at. This was just an unknown person who's still out there in the world. The prosecution said the only inescapable conclusion is that this man killed his own flesh and blood for money. This I don't understand. He followed that up by saying, "Think how easy it would be for him to kill a stranger for money." I'm not sure I understand that statement. I read it a bunch of times when I was writing this. Either way, anyways, the source of the cyanide was never identified. However, friends, family, coworkers all testified against Ronald, and many testified about how he had asked several different people how to get the poison, what its lethal dosage was. So it wasn't just his friend that he had called, months before Halloween. Apparently there had been multiple people that he had asked. His sister-in-law testified against him and said that at Timothy's funeral, Ronald spoke about using the insurance payout to take a lengthy vacation. Ronald's own wife Daneen testified against him. She maintained that she was completely unaware of her husband's plans. She also divorced him soon after testifying against him. She apparently later remarried and still lives in the area, which is peculiar to me. All in all, the jury deliberated for only 46 minutes before finding Ronald guilty for 1 charge of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. About an hour later, they did his sentencing, which seemed odd to me. So the prosecution was going after the death penalty, and they said it was no easy task to go after this, to get the death penalty for him, because he never had anything in his life but a parking ticket. And so one of the prosecutors said, quote, "So how did the evidence support that he wasn't capable of rehabilitation?" Which I think is such an interesting question that I wish I had somebody to talk about it with. Because I guess, and maybe this is well known, so forgive me if this sounds like such a stupid thing to say, but I guess that you only go ideally, you only go after the death penalty if you believe that person is not capable of changing or being rehabilitated or becoming a better person, I guess. But how do you determine that? I don't have the answer, and I feel like it will be boring if I try and debate this by myself, so I won't. I'll save it for maybe a conversation. I'll write it down to have with Mark. But they did sentence him to death. So it was difficult, but they were able to do it. He was sentenced to death. His lawyers almost immediately appealed this, and the appeals continued. He appealed, denied, continued for almost a decade. He continued to claim that he was innocent, but the court ordered one of the final appeals. The court still denied it and said, no, you are going to be put to death on Halloween night in 1982, which I think is great. I like that. But there were several challenges. They did attempt to do it. There were challenges with the lethal injection, and that 2 different times there were challenges. So that ended up delaying the execution. But by March 31st, 1984, at this point, Ronald is known as the Candyman. On March 31st, 1984, he was going to be put to death. He ate a final meal of steak, French fries, peas, and a Boston cream pie before being executed by it was pretty new back then, lethal cocktail of drugs. This was considered more humane than electrocution or cyanide gas, although I feel like cyanide gas would have been a very fitting death sentence for him. And at 12:48 a.m. on March 31st, 1984, he was declared dead. He agreed to donate his eyes for research and cataract transplants, which is amazing. I think he was an optician. That's just so, I know the word, I know it's not ironic, but it's something. So as the execution was taking place, over 300 people wearing Halloween masks gathered outside the prison. There was a handful of them that were anti-death penalty protesters. The majority of them were there in support of him being put to death, and they were chanting "trick or treat" and throwing candy at the anti-death penalty protesters. So this case, which I cannot believe I had never heard of, but it really fueled a lot of fears around Halloween candy. And that's a concern. I mean, I do remember that when I was young. I remember that when I was a teacher, which wasn't that long ago. about don't eat any candy that is even a little bit open, that looks like it's been opened and resealed. It was, I don't want to say a big concern when I was little. So when I was little, it was the late 80s. So it wasn't that long after he was put to death. It was a concern. And still, apparently, I don't know, I don't have kids, so maybe if you do have kids that you take trick-or-treating, you can weigh in on this. Is this something that is still talked about? Like, don't eat any candy that looks like it's been opened, or tampered with or anything like that. Let me know. I'd be interested to know if it still is. But, before this happened, before this poisoning happened, I did mention that there were people, for no reason, there was no particular reason. Nothing had happened like this had ever happened before, but people were concerned about there being, broken glass or razor blades or things like that in candy. And then after this happened, that became a real concern. And, the rumor mill, there were tales of tampered Halloween treats that have made the rounds. I mean, nationwide. I remember hearing various stories about like, oh, well, this kid got broken glass in his candy. So, make sure you check your candy. But there's, very little evidence to suggest that this needs to be a concern, except for this story. Because there apparently, since 1974, there have been no documented cases of children dying from consuming contaminated Halloween candy. There is a case in the year 2000. A man in Minneapolis faced charges because he was inserting needles into Snickers bars and then handing those out to trick-or-treaters. Luckily, the only injury that came from that is a teenager poked himself in the finger when opening the Snickers bar. But apparently nobody was really injured from that. Nobody died, and nobody has died from any kind of glass, razor blades, poison, anything, or drugs. I do remember when I was a kid, it was like, well, people could put acid or ecstasy in the candy. And then the kind of counter argument to that was like, why would somebody waste their drugs on drugging strangers, like strange kids? What would be the point of that? So very scary and awful, awful story. However, seems like since that really hasn't ever happened again in 50 years, that it's not something to be hugely concerned with. Although I definitely would be concerned about it if I had kids. I don't know. I don't know. I don't think I would be okay with my kids eating candy from strangers. Yeah, that's the paranoid person in me. I'd love to hear from parents who have young kids or did have young kids that you take trick-or-treating. Kind of what are your thoughts on this? Is it something you worry about? Yeah, just a terrible story. I mean, killing your 8-year-old son for his insurance money, it's sickening. So sorry to put a damper on the Halloween spirit with this terrible story, but that is the story of the murder of Timothy O'Brien. And as always, thoughts are with his family. And hopefully I did this story justice. I feel like I was a little, I don't know, I guess morning time. I've said nighttime isn't my time for telling crime stories. Maybe morning time isn't either. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm stumbling through it, and I know this case really well. This one has been in the works for a minute. I've gone through it and gone over it a bunch of times. So I still feel like I stumbled a little bit through it. Sorry, guys. Maybe mid-afternoon is the time to record. I'll have to try that. But that is our story for this week. I am not going to edit it since I am already late with it. I'm going to export it, put it out right now. And that's it. Thank you. I did see an email or a Patreon. I saw a couple messages from people suggesting other Halloween spooky stories. So I'm going to take a look at those. Still working through Instagram messages. And what else? That's it. I'll be back with one more spooky story and Halloween story before Halloween next Thursday. And yeah, love you guys. Thank you for listening. And I hope you're all having a fabulous October. Okay, bye guys.
Death by Southwest is hosted by Jenna Schneider and Margot Carmichael.
Executive produced by Margot Carmichael.
Produced by Jenna Schneider.
Audio editing and sound design by Margot Carmichael.
Music by Soundstripe.
And a special thanks to Edward R. Murrow for letting us borrow his famous sign-off phrase, good night and good luck.